Lauren, good morning and thanks for your time. Can you give us some idea of what these findings were? What did you find was the impact of those who no longer received this type of grant?
Good morning and thanks for having me on the show. What we found was relatively disappointing because we know that child support grants have a very positive impact in the life of children and their families when children are growing up. But what we saw when we looked at young people who were 21 to 22 years old we compared a group who had received the child support grant against a group who were eligible but didn't receive the child support grant. And we found that on 3 indicators, young people who were receiving the child support grant did no better than their eligible non-recipient counterparts. So if we look at employment, for instance, they were no more likely to be employed. And they were just as likely to still be not in employment, education, or training. They did have slightly more years of school education, but were no more likely than their counterparts to have completed their matric. And both groups reported similar levels of health at the time that they were 21 to 22 years old.
Okay, so in terms of those who moved on and the 21 and 22-year-olds that you found, I mean, just to look at the amount of the grants that we're actually talking about, we're always hearing it's barely enough anyway for anyone to make a living. So you have to wonder, you know, those who are using them, those who have had a chance to use those grants, how were they using those grants that would give them that slight advantage?
So the amount of the grant is 420 Rand a month per child. So it is a very small amount and it's intended to cover basic needs. And what we find across research is that in general it is used for that. It's for household needs, for food, for instance, school, additional costs of schooling. But what our research is showing is that the grant in and of itself can't do what we needed to do to make sure that young people are transitioning better into adulthood. There needs to be a range of services and other human capital investments over the life course of a child that will prepare them to adequately transition into employment at a later stage. So for instance, when we look, what we did in the study, in addition to comparing the 2 groups, was we also looked at what are the life course and demographic factors that shape their outcomes. And one of the critical findings is when we look at what kinds of schools these young people went to, if we isolate a group that went to higher quintile schools, so your quintile 4 and 5 wealthier public schools, they do better on their employment and education outcomes. And so it really speaks to other human capital investments like education, and the poor quality of education that so many of our young people face really undermines what the grant can do. If we have a suite of investments, really good quality public education, the grant, good basic health care, those kind of investments, in addition to welfare services where they're needed, is a package that can help young people to better transition into adulthood, to find employment, to get into post-secondary education and the like.
So where do these investments need to come from?
So we already invest significantly in education. The trick is about getting the education system working for young people. There's a lot of research that's been done to show that many young people exit our education system without even the most basic skills that employers need. And so fixing the education system and providing bridging services for young people who've already been through a poor quality education system, like youth employability programs, are critical if we're going to help young people to transition more effectively.
So as a result, Lauren, then what are we seeing happening? Are these the vast number of unemployed youth that we are seeing? They make up a large part of that number.
Absolutely, and you saw the statistics released last month about our latest youth unemployment figures. These are the young people who are most vulnerable to being unemployed and also to being not in employment, education and training, and therefore more and more difficult to reach and support to get them back on track.
Okay, so definitely a bleak future at the moment, but is there a chance that we could get on the right track, and how soon?
I think we have seen a lot of interest in the issues to do with youth, particularly over Youth Month. My hope is that that is sustained over time and that what President Ramaphosa has been talking about in the State of the Nation addresses really comes to light, and that there's a concerted effort across different sectors in society to recognize the needs of young people and to continue investing and believing in them. When we speak to young people, they want an opportunity, they want to make a difference, and we really need to make sure that the systems are in place to make that a reality for them.
Okay, thanks very much for that insight. UJ Centre for Social Development in Africa, Associate Professor Lauren Graham.